I wanted to do a bit of a follow-up on a topic I've talked about several times in the past, and I'm probably going to keep talking about in the future: ADHD. I'm sure in the title I wrote that somewhere, so if you're here, chances are, I doubt most of you are going to support me. I assume most of you are probably going to be upset that I even posted a video like this in the first place. But I want to stand by some of the things I said in the past, because a while back, I made at least 2 videos talking about how I don't believe ADHD is a real thing. And I want to clarify some things in this video. Spoiler alert, for the most part, I still believe everything that I previously said to be true. But what I want to do in this video is a little bit different. What I did is I've been trying to do a bit more research about ADHD, its origins, how it's diagnosed, what the symptoms are, how exactly people go about, identifying these symptoms. And I want to give my 2 cents kind of based on a bunch of different topics and a bunch of different, things that I've discovered. And so, real quick, a little bit of a background story into why I even decided to talk about ADHD in the first place. 2 things in particular make me want to talk about it. One, several years ago, a while back, when I was in college, I would see people get diagnosed with ADHD, and I thought it was a bit ridiculous, to be honest, that certain people got diagnosed with such a disorder. Because once I heard about what the disorders, how the disorders were diagnosed, they sounded a bit ridiculous. They sounded a bit just vague. And at the time, I had very strong opinions about ADHD, just because it felt like a means of getting people prescribed to a drug that ultimately harmed them more than it helped. I'm super big on, when it's possible, avoiding drugs at all costs. If you take a drug to improve your life and there are pretty much no side effects, no real objective measurable side effects, that's a bit different. I don't mind that. I don't count that. But if you're taking a drug in order to solve a problem, and there are side effects, there are detriments, there are downsides, but someone, especially a physician, tells you that you need to take this drug in order to make your life better, in order to fix whatever problem you have, that's kind of where I believe issues arise. And I think there's a lot of issues with ADHD because of the medications that get prescribed to a very specific group of people, primarily. So that was one big issue. Second issue is something that came up a bit recently. Now I have notes in front of me. They're not crazy notes, but I do have a bunch of different things I'm gonna probably cite, things I'm gonna read in this video, just refer back to. And I do have some notes, a little outline that I wanted to kind of hit, just to make sure that I'm not all over the place, rambling too much, as I tend to do. So the second thing that made me want to talk about ADHD, there was a case that came up recently. I think it just concluded in December of last year, of 2025. And it involved this young lady named, I think, Nicole Hogg. And I didn't go through all of the court documents. Maybe I will in the future at some point. But just to kind of give what I've seen as the gist of the case. This young lady, Nicole Hogg, worked at this company from 2021 until recently. When she first started working at the company, she did not have a formal ADHD diagnosis. As she began working at this company, she discovered that she struggled to basically just do basic tasks. She couldn't get her work done on time. She struggled to focus when she was at work. She struggled to show up to meetings when meetings were required to be shown up to. From what I understand too, she would also often leave work abruptly or leave work randomly and do things like go to Starbucks, go shopping, things of that nature. And the issue, which led to the lawsuit, is her employer pretty much called her, I think, quote unquote, disorganized. Now, her calling her disorganized, I think ultimately prompted her to take him to court because she considered it a form of discrimination. Now, for anyone who knows this case better than I do, who's actually read through all the court documents, please give your insights below. Like I said, I've read bits and pieces of it. This is kind of the gist of what I've discovered based on the few different documents, the few different things I've read. I did find the actual transcript of the court documents, at least at a glance. It seemed like the transcript of the court documents. I didn't want to read them all because, quite frankly, it was a lot of pages and I didn't want to sit there and read all of them when I pulled them up because I didn't think it'd be that long. But maybe in the future I will, if this video does well enough and if there's demand for me to do so. But yeah, long story short, she claimed that she was discriminated against because someone called her disorganized, which we can talk about in the future about how claims like that to me are also just garbage. Being disorganized to me is not discriminatory by any means, but that's a whole different scenario. Apparently the courts disagree, but I often disagree with some court decisions. Anyway, that was the second thing that prompted me to want to make a video about ADHD. And my reasoning back then, and it's still true to this day, is that ADHD to me is far too subjective. ADHD is a bit too subjective for me. I said in the past, ADHD doesn't exist. And when I say things like that, I'm intentionally being a bit hyperbolic just to kind of get a reaction out of people. But a part of me really does believe that ADHD basically does not really exist. And I say it doesn't really exist because outside of like very few, say for example, like a brain injury, where you absolutely do struggle to concentrate or focus on everything across the board, no matter what it is, for any extended period of time. And I'm talking about like seconds or minutes at a time, which I think is rare for most people. That's not the case. Like the average person that claims they have ADHD, or the average person that even is diagnosed with ADHD, doesn't struggle, or at least from what I've researched, from what I can tell, does not seem to struggle with that level of focus for an extended period of time across the board. Therefore, to me, it does not really exist. It's something that you can kind of pull out at a moment's notice to declare why you're struggling with something. Side note, just kind of illustrate that point a little bit better. I was watching a podcast the other day. It was Jillian Michaels versus different, I guess, overweight activists or fat activists. I think they like to be called fat activists instead of overweight activists. And when I was watching that video, one of the issues I had, and this is an issue that's come up in the past. I don't want to deviate too far into like the fitness type stuff, but I just want to use that as an example to illustrate this point. Sometimes people make excuses for why they can't do something, and they put medical labels on things as the reasoning for why they're incapable or unwilling to achieve something. And so a lot of the people who are fat activists said, we live in a fat body. Therefore, we're different than you because you live in a thin body. And it's a false understanding of what fat versus thin is. Like at the core level, to be fat means you eat excess calories. All people are capable of being fat for the most part, outside of extreme circumstances where people probably have a crazy high metabolism that probably almost literally causes them to burn too many calories too quickly, in which case they'd probably be like emaciated and probably like they wouldn't look normal at all in that situation. Or outside of people who maybe have some crazy weird thyroid issue where they're unable to digest food or unable to metabolize food effectively, in which case they also would look extremely abnormal by even general means. Most people aren't that. So the idea of someone saying I live in a fat body is just, to me, incorrect. It's a way to manipulate language to make something seem external when in reality it's internal. And that's what I think people do with ADHD. They use ADHD as a label to make something that is internal seem external, because when something seems external, it's much more difficult to fix. I think that's why people use the term ADHD, and that's the kind of thing that I dislike, and that's the kind of thing I want to push back against. Now, I'm going to try my best to, I guess, tackle different aspects of ADHD as coherently and as clearly as I can. I don't want this video to be too long, but I'm sure it's going to get long because this is just a very interesting topic, and there's quite a few things I want to talk about. Disclaimer, I know we're kind of far in the video as right now, but disclaimer, this is not meant to offend anybody. I've talked about ADHD in the past, and people often get very offended whenever I bring up ADHD. This video is not meant to offend you. I will say this: if you do get offended by it, I would strongly suggest maybe taking a deeper look at why you're offended by it. What I tend to find, this is just my personal stance, is that sometimes people get offended by things because they have a strong identity to something. And it creates cognitive dissonance when you criticize that thing, because effectively you're criticizing their identity. It's kind of like if you're someone who's a hardcore Christian and I say that I do not believe in Christianity, you will be offended. Not because I meant to be offensive, not because the things I say are incorrect or nonsensical or meant to be triggering or antagonizing in any way. But in reality, your perception is that you're antagonized because your identity is so deeply tied to that thing, in this hypothetical situation, Christianity, that it feels like an insult to you for me to even dare criticize it. Same with ADHD. So like I said, this is not meant to be an insult. This is not meant to be antagonistic. This is not meant to be offensive. You can interpret it that way, and that's totally fine. You're free to do whatever you want, but you don't have to. This is kind of the point that I'm making. One more thing I want to bring up before I kind of get into some of my viewpoints. I'm always open to additional feedback. I'm always open to additional paperwork. If you have like different studies that you want to cite or that you want to share with me that I can read through to get your perspective, I'm always happy to do those things. A lot of people, what they do is I'll bring up a point and they'll get mad that I brought up the point, but they don't refute the point with actual evidence. They just say, I don't like that point. It's like, well, that's cool. You might not like the point, but just because you don't like my point doesn't make you correct, and it doesn't make me incorrect, unless you're willing to give evidence or proof that you are correct. And I know a lot of people say, like, what are your sources? Cite your sources, and they don't bother to read the sources. I'm different. If you give me your sources, I'll read them. Leave a comment below with your source. I'll read them. Obviously, if it's something that's like super expensive, like $100, just to read like a short article or a short study that might not even be properly constructed. I'm not going to go through all that because there's just no real reason for that. In that case, give me like the TLDR version, or give me like the AI synopsis of it, and I'll happily read it. But in general, if you give me like your resources or citations, I'm happy to read them in full. And then one more final thing I want to bring up before I kind of get into like my thoughts on ADHD. The reason why I like to do things like this, the reason why I like to challenge things, is because I feel like oftentimes in society, we have these beliefs about something, and we have very strong beliefs about how things work. And we rely on kind of authority figures to give us these beliefs. But the problem is that authority figures can be incorrect. And if you look throughout history, a lot of times they are incorrect. There was once upon a time, cigarettes were not considered unhealthy, right? Physicians, medical professionals smoked cigarettes, not thinking much of them. Until later on, people like me challenged that notion. People did additional research and found out that, oh, cigarettes actually are quite unhealthy for you. They cause cancer. They have a lot of crazy chemicals in them. They're not good for you at all. Stop taking them, or stop consuming them. To the point where you had to actually have like a Surgeon General warning on cigarettes saying like, hey, you don't want to do these things. So, and that's just one example. There's different examples throughout history where people have different diagnoses of things. People once thought phrenology was a real type of science. People thought electroshock therapy was a good way to relieve things of like things such as being like gay. There's all kinds of different things throughout history that people have done in the name of science or in the name of a professional believing that they had the answers to something that was ultimately incorrect when challenged. So this is why it's good to challenge things as often as possible. You cannot find truth if you're unwilling to challenge what you believe to be true. Does that make sense? So again, this is why I do this, because people talk about ADHD, people talk about these different diagnoses, and then when I look at them and I try to analyze them critically, they don't hold up to scrutiny. They don't make sense. And what most people do is say like, whoa, this person said that this thing is real, and this thing that I believe to be real protects me, and it protects the things that I believe to be true, therefore you're incorrect. And it's like, that's not how the world works. Like, just because you don't want it to be true doesn't make it untrue. It doesn't make the things I'm saying untrue. So I want to get that out of the way as well. Now, where do we begin? ADHD to me is a very weird diagnosis because it's a very general diagnosis. And what I mean by that is everyone can have it at any point in time based on the setting that they're in. And that means that to me, it ultimately does not exist. If everyone can have something, then it is ultimately irrelevant, right? Going back to that Nicole Hoggs case, or Nicole Hogger, whatever her name is, case, when I was looking at the details of the case, it didn't seem like she had a disease, and it didn't seem like she had something that she couldn't control. It really just felt like she was making an excuse to not want to work. And the issue is like, if you say, oh, I have ADHD, oh, how are we defining ADHD? Well, we define ADHD as an ability to sit still and to focus on things. But that's true of everybody, right? Most people have an inability or unwillingness to sit down and focus on things, because most things that we have to sit down and focus on on a daily basis is quite boring. It's quite unappealing. It's not very interesting. Therefore, we struggle to do it. And I've said this in the past. I rarely see someone with, like, when I say rarely, I mean like never. I've actually never seen someone with ADHD struggle to focus or struggle to do a task that they find deeply interesting inherently. I had one friend who mentioned to me that he has a friend who has ADHD, who was diagnosed, and he does struggle to focus on anything, regardless of what it is. And that could be true. And like I said earlier in the video, there are certainly outliers to everything. There are some people who definitely do have like a traumatic brain injury or some like issue where no matter what they do, no matter what they try, they will struggle to focus, if we're talking about ADHD, on everything, anything and everything at all times of the day. And that's different because that's objectively measurable in my personal opinion. You can sit there and say, okay, no matter what we put in front of this person, they always struggle to focus for about 10 seconds. Like after 10 seconds, they lose all focus, and it's consistent across the board with everything. To me, that makes it more real. Now, if someone says, oh, well, I have ADHD. Why do you have ADHD? Because whenever I go to work at my office job that I don't really like to do and I don't get paid very much to do, after about 20 minutes, I struggle to focus. It's like, okay, you're bored and you're underpaid. Therefore, you have no motivation to work, or you have no discipline to work at this job, which is fine. That's probably like 99.9% of people in that setting. Explain to me how you have ADHD, though. Oh, well, when I was in school, my teacher said that I fidgeted too much in class, and that led to me I struggled to focus on what they were saying. I struggled to sit still. I fidgeted a lot. But my response to that would be, so you sound like most kids. You sound like pretty much every kid in that situation. Like most kids probably don't care about what's going on in school, because for most kids, the value of school isn't really adequately presented to them. So sure, you're gonna fidget and you're gonna struggle to focus because the things you're trying to focus on aren't worth focusing on, at least in your mind. But my doctor also said that I fidgeted when I went to speak to them, because you could be anxious, you could be nervous. And I know some people say, I was reading a bunch of things about ADHD, and people said, well, anxiety could be like a secondary problem that someone has, which could lead to the fidgeting. So you have to be careful not to misdiagnose people. But it's like, anxiety is also something that is somewhat subjective. Like, personally, I went to court yesterday. I was a bit anxious going to court. Does that mean I have a disorder? No. But anxiety is a natural feeling that pretty much all humans have, outside of people, like outliers, people who might be like psychopaths, or people who might have some like general disorder that prevents that feeling from occurring. But most people feel anxiety. Most people feel sadness. Most people feel most people can have a lack of focus. Most people can be fidgety. Most people can be temperamental. These things are conditions that exist in basically all humans. But again, if you're looking for reasons to give someone a label and you say that these very generic, very common things are the reason for that label, then to me, the label doesn't truly exist. And that's my point with ADHD again. It doesn't really exist because everyone can have these things when you scrutinize people's behavior too carefully. Now, when I was kind of going over ADHD, and I'm going to probably read a few of these things, my primary source, to be honest, was, let me see. I got a lot of pages, so I apologize. My primary resource was the CDC, and I just kind of wanted to go over a few of the statistics that I found because I thought they were a bit interesting, and to me, they kind of check out and match what I expected them to look like based on like my theory of about what ADHD truly is. So just to kind of give like just to read a little bit of it. It says that millions of US children have been diagnosed with ADHD. An estimated 7 million US children aged 3 through 17 have been diagnosed with ADHD, according to a national survey of parents using data from 2022. ADHD estimates by sex, race, and ethnicity. 15% of boys were more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than girls, and girls are evaluated at about 8%. Now, this to me was predictable, but also quite interesting. And the reason why it was predictable but interesting was, I sent a different video. I anticipated that more boys would be diagnosed with ADHD because the things that are symptoms of ADHD tend to be done by boys more frequently, especially when they're young boys. And the reason is because, like I mentioned earlier, you're in a school setting, which boys probably don't find interesting to begin with. And you're essentially believing that they should conform to the standards you set. And what I mean by that is, imagine you're in a school setting and the standard is you be quiet, you follow instructions, and you sit still. Cool. A lot of boys, and this is like my headcanon, I don't have like real tangible like evidence to prove this, but I think that genetically, I do think that boys are more inclined to want to move around and be more active while young than girls do. And I'd be willing to bet, I'd be willing to put money on it that if someone did like good research on this, they'd probably find this to be objectively and conclusively true. To me, it's like this equivalent of saying like people with testosterone are more likely to have more aggressive behaviors than people with estrogen. People with estrogen are more likely to have more passive qualities than people with testosterone or with higher testosterone. Does that make sense? Effectively, I think boys are more likely to engage in behaviors that would be considered aggressive or maybe in a classroom setting unruly, compared to girls who probably are more inclined to just listen to things, or more inclined to just be quiet, or inclined to follow whatever the status quo or follow whatever the leader of said group dictates. I think boys naturally are a little bit more rebellious, so they're less inclined to just listen to things like that. Especially when you're in a setting like school in which people do not know the reason why they're doing something. Like if you say to an average 8-year-old boy, sit still all day long, he probably would ask why. And if you can't give him a good enough reason why, he's probably not going to sit still. Now, of course, there are other things that can make him sit still, like, and I'm not recommending this, but I'm just saying, these are examples. Abuse or hardcore aggression, that'll probably get him to sit still because now fear is the motivation. If I don't sit still, I get hurt, and I don't want to get hurt, so I'd rather just sit still and not talk. I think if you give the right incentive, you can get kids to behave appropriately, but I don't think the proper incentives are being given, and that's why you see these behaviors, especially with young boys, and not so much with young girls. I think the incentive for girls are a bit different, but I think the problem is that in a school setting, you're putting all kids as just one single type of like entity. It's like, oh, all kids should behave this way. It's like, oh, boys are different than girls. Boys in this setting are different than girls in this setting. You need to treat them different. You need to give them different incentives in order for you to get the behaviors you want out of these groups. Hopefully that makes sense. So when I saw that boys were diagnosed more frequently, I figured, yeah, obviously, like when I was a kid, and based on like a lot of these symptoms, I have ADHD. But I don't label myself with ADHD, and I never will, because like I never will, honestly. Like I'll do it jokingly to be silly, or to be a bit provocative, but in no realistic situation would I ever consider myself to be someone with ADHD, because these things just don't affect me. And because they don't affect me, there's no real reason to wear the label, even though I have like all the symptoms of ADHD. So again, I'm not surprised kids young boys in particular get diagnosed with ADHD because they probably get diagnosed in settings in which they're just bored. They just don't want to be in that setting. So of course they're going to be fidgety. Of course they're going to be a little bit disruptive. Of course they're going to say things. They're going to speak before they're given an opportunity to speak. Like when you're a kid, especially when you're a young boy, sometimes you don't want to raise your hand because it seems a little bit silly. It's like I have to raise my hand and like wait for the teacher to call me. I just want to say something. Like let me say it now because it's on my mind. It's not ADHD necessarily. It's you're a young kid. It's kind of like when you see a little kid who interrupts their parents talking. Would you consider that kid ADHD because they're not speaking when spoken to, or they're not speaking at an appropriate time? It's like you could, I guess you could, technically. Maybe you can call them being a little bit hyperactive because they want to get your attention really bad. Or you can just chalk it up to they do not understand the reason why waiting until parents are finished talking is appropriate because they're young kids. Like they haven't been taught why these things matter. And you haven't given them a proper incentive to care when you teach them that these things matter. So just to kind of continue more, it says about 6 in 10 children have moderate or severe ADHD. So the majority of kids, effectively, a little bit over basically the majority of kids, slightly over half, have severe or moderate ADHD. Again, I'm chalking this up to kids are just kids. The things that you consider symptoms of ADHD are really just the symptoms of people, young people, little kids, not wanting to sit still and not wanting to be in the settings in which these diagnoses take place, school, or in like a formal setting like a medical office. Children with both ADHD and another co-occurring condition such as behavioral or conduct problems, learning disorders, anxiety, or depression more often had severe ADHD than children with ADHD without other co-occurring conditions. Now, I want to bring this up really quick, a little bit of a personal anecdote to really illustrate why I don't think ADHD really exists, and it's more of the setting putting the label on the individual, in this case, kid. A couple years ago, I think back in like 2018-ish, I used to be a tutor. I was with this company called Varsity Tutors. Pretty much Varsity Tutors, you have a certain skill set, or you can take tests to learn certain skills or demonstrate that you have certain skills, and you can go around and tutor people. You can tutor people in person, or you can tutor people online. And so primarily I was an SAT tutor, and I was a bit of an English tutor as well, but I also help people with time management and with learning strategies. And so one kid, I remember his parents reached out through Varsity Tutors, and they were like, we need someone to help my son. I think he was like 11 or 12. We need someone to help my son with learning strategies. He was in 7th grade, so how old does that make him? I think like 11 or 12, yeah. He was a 7th grader, and they said he struggled to learn. He struggled to focus in school. And so we did a video interview, super nice kid, super cool kid. I talked to him. I was expecting like very disruptive behavior because people said, oh, he's super disruptive and he really struggles to focus. He really struggles to pay attention. I had no issue with him at all. And I'm talking to him and trying to figure out like, why exactly do they believe that he has trouble focusing? What are the things that you like? And he says to me, super smart kid. He says, my parents think that I struggle to focus in school. To be honest, I don't really see the value in school. And I was like, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? I want to be an entrepreneur. Okay, cool. Interesting question for a kid. I say this is interesting because when I was a kid, I had no idea what entrepreneurship was. Now, granted, he's 11 years old. This is 2018. The internet's more of a thing than it was when I was a kid. So it's easier to be exposed to people on like social media, different like entrepreneurs, influencers, all the stuff, to help you learn about these things earlier on. I totally get that. But it was still fascinating because most kids, you wouldn't think want to be entrepreneurs. You think they want to do more childish things, like more aspirational things like police, firefighter, maybe astronaut, kind of the things that society tells you should be when you're a kid, the things that seem like hero type work. He said entrepreneur. And so I said to him, interesting. Who are your inspirations? What makes you want to be an entrepreneur? What are your inspirations? And he kind of talks about how he likes the ability to create things as an entrepreneur. He likes the idea of influencing people around him, influencing the world. And then he starts citing that his favorite entrepreneurs are Walt Disney, Elon Musk, etc. And I thought that was fascinating. So we go deeper and deeper, and I say to him, have you ever done research on being an entrepreneur? Like, how much about entrepreneurship do you know? This kid goes to rattle on maybe for like 20 minutes, so many different details about the structure of Disney, about the history of Walt Disney, about the history of Elon Musk. He goes on to say that he read a book about Walt Disney and like how he went from having Disney as an idea to Disney becoming what it is today. He goes on to talk about how he read the biography, the biography of Elon Musk, which is, for the record, I wanted to read that book myself. I haven't read it yet. It's a thick book. I almost bought it. It's a thick book. Now, again, this kid's like 11. One of the symptoms of ADHD is the inability to focus. It's the inability, one of the symptoms could be hyperactivity. I got none of that from him, But I'd be willing to bet, now you can make the argument perhaps he was on some kind of drug that made him focus more, and that could be the case. But I really think deep down, what truly was the situation is that he's just bored. He's just bored. When he's at school, they're probably talking about stuff that he understands and just doesn't care about. But when he's talking about things like entrepreneurship, because he's so young, I'd be willing to bet most people dismiss him talking about entrepreneurship. Most people probably do not understand entrepreneurship enough or care about it enough to listen to him when he brings it up. And so he probably gets a bit anxious. He probably gets a bit irritable because it's like, I'm talking about this thing that's super fascinating to me, and no one around me seems to be fascinated by it. No one around me seems to want to talk about it. So now I'm upset, and now I'm anxious. Now I'm maybe a little bit depressed. Now I'm a little bit mad because I have no one to talk to about this specific topic. And I can't, and it's a unique thing because I'm just different than everyone else. So no one's talking about this thing because no one else is as unique or as different as I am. It's a bit frustrating, I imagine. I say this from personal experience. He doesn't lack an inability to focus either because he read a whole like 300-page book. Let me be real with you. How many 11 or 10-year-olds do you know that would voluntarily sit there and read a 300-page book? I think with most kids, unless you really like force them to do it, like really put their feet to the fire, maybe if you heavily medicate them, like heavily medicate them, apply a little bit of hypnosis, maybe some voodoo or black magic, maybe then you'd get most kids to sit there and genuinely, out of their own free will, read a 300+ page book with no pictures, no like, it's not a child's book, it's an adult book. Very few kids are gonna do that. But I thought one of the symptoms was an inability to focus. But clearly he's focusing. Clearly he's engaging with me when I'm talking about something he's interested in. Clearly, clearly he's defying all the symptoms of ADHD. So could it perhaps be that he doesn't necessarily have ADHD? And perhaps the situation could be that in the setting in which he's diagnosed in, he struggles to focus because that setting is boring. Like, it's not him. It's the setting and the people around him that make him act that way, which leads to people believing that he has these symptoms. But like I mentioned earlier, everyone will exhibit those symptoms under certain circumstances. If you take anybody and put them in a circumstance in which they're unreasonably bored, they're probably gonna fidget a bit. They're probably gonna not focus correctly because the things you're trying to push on them, the things you're trying to engage them with are not interesting to them. So they're not gonna listen to it. They're gonna zone out. They're gonna tune you out. They're not gonna focus. Natural human behavior. Hyperactivity. You might, if you have a lot of energy pent up, but you can't release it, inevitably you start to move around a lot. You start to fidget. Adults do this too all the time, by the way. You see like some adult, when they're, say for example, like I'm including college students as like adults. It's like when you're in a classroom in college and perhaps you have a lot of energy or perhaps you're like anxious because if you've ever been in situations where you have to like read in front of a class, you're thinking about it and the anticipation makes you like nervous. So you sit there and like you tap your feet. Some people do this. Or you start like fidgeting. People had like, I remember when I was in college, fidget spinners were like a big thing. Everyone had fidget spinners because everyone fidgets at some point in time because a lot of people get anxious and a lot of people get nervous, especially when you're in a setting like college where there's a lot of pressure put on you and you have a lot of tests, a lot of assignments, all of which have deadlines, and Productivity Accelerator is not around to help you. Little plug right there. But hopefully you get the point that I'm making. This is why I don't believe that ADHD is really a thing, because everyone has the traits that, everyone has the symptoms of ADHD. So if everyone has the symptoms, then, it's hard to consider it something that's objectively had by a group of people. So that's kind of the main thing. And I kind of went on to look up ADHD in adults because I was thinking to myself, well, if ADHD is truly a real truly a real thing that people can be diagnosed with, that's truly objective, then adults should have it more or less at the same frequency as kids, because kids that have it should also have it as an adult. And as an adult, the symptoms should be a lot more easily, I would say, identifiable, probably more easily, or you should be easier to articulate that you have these symptoms. So I did a bit of research, and I'm, a decent amount. And I did not find, I'll put it this way, I found exactly what I thought I'd find. Most of the symptoms just ended up being more or less the same. Your focus is not always there. You struggle to pay attention. You don't recall things a lot. But the thing that I found interesting is that in almost all cases of ADHD, whenever these symptoms popped up, they were always in workplace settings, workplace or school settings. Again, I find that fascinating because, again, these are settings that people just inherently find boring, which means that to me, you don't have a disease, you don't have a condition, you just lack the strategies to concentrate. And you lack strategies that are exclusive to you. You lack things that you need to, you lack like the tools that are custom tailored to who you are as an individual. Because I bring that up because I've seen people say like a common myth is that people who have ADHD just are undisciplined or just struggle to, or aren't trying, they're lazy. And it's like, I don't think that they're necessarily lazy. There are people that probably do try, but there are people who probably don't try right. Like you probably don't try correctly or effectively because you don't have the correct tools. Because people oftentimes, it's true of like modern science, it's true of like society as a whole, modern education, we give blanket statements to people and blanket statements don't work. there's 8 billion people on the planet. There's several, 100 million people in the country. You can't give a blanket statement to all these people and expect the same thing to work for every single person. It doesn't work that way. The numbers just don't make sense. It's like finances. If I said to everyone that everyone needs to buy a house, everyone needs a budget, everyone needs to do things the exact same way, step by step, ABC, 1, 2, 3, it's not going to work because everyone has different circumstances that prevent them from applying those steps effectively and correctly. It doesn't make sense. Another example, kind of going back to that video I mentioned earlier with like Jillian Michaels. She was having a debate. People on the show were saying, on that debate were saying, I can't lose weight. Like, I cannot lose weight. The things that people have told me to do not work for me, which is false. It's just not true. You can say that the strategies might not have worked for you personally. Maybe people gave you very generic strategies. Maybe you went to a trainer who didn't know their stuff very well and they said, oh, if you want to lose weight, you need to burn, like, you need to eat less. That's not quite true. So, because there's more nuance to it. Burning calories is different than just not eating. Because obviously if you don't eat, you might get in starvation mode, and that'll make it actually harder for you to lose weight. You might just get hunger, like different cravings that might lead to you binge eating. Like, there's nuance to all these things. Or it'd be kind of like saying to someone, yeah, if you want to lose weight, you just have to eat like 1,500 calories per day. That's not really correct. Maybe in the average size person, if you're like an adult male who weighs like 150 pounds, maybe then 1,500 calories might be good for you to lose weight. If we take into consideration your height, your BMI, your general activity level, sure, for you, that might be the case. But for someone who's like 7'1", who might have a history of being overweight, who might have no muscle on them, that might be a bit different. They might need to eat a lot less or a lot more to reach the point where their body's in fat burning mode to get them to lose weight. And there might be other strategies based on different mental health issues, based on different settings that they're in, that will help them keep the weight off. Not to get too deep into like a fitness talk, but hopefully you get the point that I'm making. The people who have ADHD who say that they're not lazy or certain tactics just don't work for them, which is the reason why they know they have ADHD, I would disagree with that. I'd say probably what happened is you probably got a very broad idea of how to deal with your ADHD, if you got any like tips on how to deal with it. But it's too broad for you. Like, you need to have something more tailored, more custom fitting, more bespoke for you. And that's the reason why it didn't work for you. Are you lazy? Not necessarily. Now, I'm sure there are some people who claim they have ADHD who actually are quite lazy, and that's their excuse. They say, oh, I can't focus. Really, they didn't try to focus, but they'll say like, oh, I have ADHD, that's why I can't focus. You tried to do this thing for 2 minutes, it didn't work out nearly as fast as you wanted it to work out, and you're blaming ADHD as the reason why it didn't work out. But in all reality, you're just lazy. You didn't try very hard because your expectation of how much effort is required to get a certain result is not managed correctly. It's not well tailored. Like, you don't understand correctly how much effort it takes to get the things you want. So you didn't put enough effort in, which is fine. If you're happy with that, that's totally fine. But don't blame ADHD. It's not ADHD, it's a you thing. I just found it fascinating. All the adults that I saw that were diagnosed with ADHD, they only had these symptoms in settings that they found quite boring. And I remember a while back, I was kind of debating, I did another video about this. I was debating AI about ADHD. And AI, funny enough, I would like ask it to cite sources, and it would quickly cite sources based on like really commonly accepted things. But then I kind of gave it a scenario. I said, can you give me any studies showing that people exhibit traits of ADHD when doing things that they actually enjoy? So for example, if you're a girl who has ADHD, and I think I used this example in another video, if you're a girl that has ADHD, do you show symptoms of ADHD when you're doing activities such as, and this is a bit stereotypical, but hopefully you get the point that I'm trying to make, when you're going to the mall with friends, when you're socializing, when you're at a party, when you're watching a TV show amongst friends, or when you're watching a TV show by yourself that you love, do you exhibit traits of ADHD? If the answer is no, then you probably don't have ADHD. You probably just struggle to focus on things because you find those things boring. If you're a guy, do you struggle to focus? Do you have these traits of ADHD when you're playing like Call of Duty? Again, stereotypical, but hopefully you get the point that I'm making. Do you have these symptoms when you're playing Call of Duty, when you're hanging out with friends, when you're talking to girls depending on your age, when you're doing guy stuff? Do you focus? Do you struggle to focus? If the answer is no, you probably don't have ADHD. You probably just don't have good strategies, or the settings in which your diagnosis took place was just a setting in which you were bored. So it's like a false diagnosis. I would love to see a study in which they take someone who has ADHD and put them in a setting in which they're doing something that they just genuinely find like engaging and like fascinating. I would almost be willing to bet like 95% of the people with ADHD, suddenly they wouldn't have ADHD. Suddenly you would just discover, oh, the settings are just boring. Real quick, I'm gonna wrap up the video. I just want to kind of share one more quick story. There was a YouTube channel I was watching the other day, and the guy on the YouTube channel, I was kind of laughing about it because I was having a debate with people about ADHD. And literally the next day, this video popped up, and this guy was talking about how he believed he had ADHD. And I think he still carries the label. He still like believes he has the label, but he said he stopped letting the label dictate how he lived his life. It's starting to storm. And he said that all throughout he first got diagnosed with it when he was like 6 or 7, and pretty much throughout all of his youth and early adulthood, he believed he struggled to learn because people told him you have ADHD, which is another big issue I have with labeling kids with ADHD, is because it creates this feedback loop, like this identity feedback loop, where you are told by an authority figure that you are something, and you believe that thing to be true because it's from an authority figure. So you live up to the expectations of others. You are told that you struggle to learn, therefore you don't put much effort into learning, because why would you do that? You struggle with learning. So why would you put an additional effort in? But he said that was his story for pretty much most of his life. And then one day he, I think, turned off social media and someone got him into reading books. And he said that he would just read books and get like immersed in like the stories, immersed in fiction. And he said that it was funny because he thought he had a problem learning, but it was just that he didn't care about the shit that he was supposed to learn. But when given something that he was actually interested in, all of a sudden, learning became easy. All of a sudden, he could focus for hours a day at a time. All of a sudden, he craved the desire to want to learn more. So again, the point is, did he have ADHD? Depends on who you ask. If you ask like the authority figures, if you ask like the doctors or the psychiatrists, they might say, yeah, of course. Because when he was a kid, he was fidgeting a lot. He probably was disruptive. Meanwhile, this guy was also like an athlete. So people I think who are naturally inclined to be like athletic probably do struggle to sit still in classrooms because you want to move outside and you're stuck inside. But it seems like common sense to me. But regardless, who would have thought that this guy as an adult would be someone who could focus more than everyone else? The guy with ADHD somehow can focus more than most adults, because most adults don't sit there and read books. Most adults have ADHD symptoms. Most adults nowadays scroll through TikTok and social media all day. Why? Because the setting and because societal programming causes them to act in that way. And then it becomes a habit. There's a feedback loop that takes place, and that becomes like the new norm of the person's brain. It's just kind of sitting there scrolling, not engaging with stuff, not paying attention. Again, if everyone's engaging in these behaviors, if everyone has these habits, then everyone has ADHD. And if everyone has ADHD, no one truly has ADHD, which is why, to me, ADHD does not really exist. So hopefully this video made sense. Let me know what you think about everything I said. If you have any contrary viewpoints, leave them below in the comments. If you have any citations or any articles you want me to read to prove your point, let me know down in the description as well, or not description, in the comments as well. I'm happy to take a look at them and read those. If you like the video, click the like button. If you really like the video, hit the hype button, because I'm trying to get more subscribers and YouTube just doesn't like me. They don't like me sharing educational content with the world. Social media, they don't want people to be smart. They want people to be dumb. They want people to just follow the masses and just engage in like stupid stuff that gets them to make money. When you sit there, when you're like me, you're trying to educate people and get people to like think outside the box, get people to think of like new realities or alternative ways of thinking, it's not beneficial to a lot of like the government and the corporations and stuff like that. So content like mine always gets suppressed. It's always been suppressed since I first started social media. It will always be suppressed because people like me, they don't want me sharing this stuff with you. But if you're still here, if you're watching this, you have a high attention span, you do not have ADHD, clearly, because you watched the end of this video. So click the like, leave a comment, share this with someone else who doesn't have ADHD as well, who wants to watch this long video. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Peace out. Bye.